My name is Levant Wooten, and I serve as the longtime treasurer of UCLA Black Alumni Association. On behalf of our association, I would like to welcome you to the Social Justice Summit. This is the third time we've done this. This is our fourth of six panel discussions that we had scheduled for this weekend. We started off with a heartfelt discussion on the life and death of Latasha Hardings on Thursday. Friday evening was a truly educational experience with the Black LGBTQ and trans community. And this morning was a step back in history with a spirited discussion with the Black Olympians for the 1968 Games. We thank you for those who have tuned and zoomed in for all or part of the weekend, and we thank those that are participating today, and we encourage you to join us for the remainder of the event schedule. Before I introduce UBA's president, I would like to encourage each of you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, our social media pages. Find out more about UBAA by going to our website, uclablackalumni.org, and become a UBA member and use your considerable talents, times, and treasures to become involved or to re-engage. I'll put the website link in the chat and information to become a member. And don't assume that because you may be a UCLA alumni member that you are a UBA member automatically. And if you have to think about if your UBA membership, you're probably not a current member. So please join and support your own cause. And you don't have to be a UCLA alumni. We have friends of UBAA. We have faculty at UBAA. You can join on behalf of your kids, your spouses, your uncle, your aunt, your parents. It doesn't really matter to us. We're an equal opportunity organization. If nothing else, I also encourage each of you to consider a donation towards UBAA social justice initiatives. These summits are vital to our Black community, both from a historical aspect as well as the current climate we live in. I'll put a link in the chat to make a donation if you choose so. With that, I would like to bring forward the woman who sits at the helm of UBAA, a non-traditional student who persevered to complete her education more than 20 years after she entered in as a freshman. She's a former UCLA homecoming queen, a member of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, and co-owner of LP Productions, which is providing the virtual production support for this weekend's events. And I'm so glad that she decided to become active in UBAA. Is that activism that has moved UBAA to heights unimaginable in my 12 years as treasurer. So give some snaps up to our Madam President, Michelle Johnson. Happy Founders Day to my brothers of 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Levant. Levant's being extra, you guys. Good afternoon. Levant, thank you. I want to thank, obviously, Levant has been with the UBA for more than a decade. He is a tremendous asset to the organization overall. We love him dearly for the work that he does. I want to thank all of our officers who are on and our board of directors for their participation and their continued support. My name is Michelle Johnson. I am the presiding president of UCLA Black Alumni Association. And I always start off with this. I am highly biased. I think that we have the best Black Alumni Association in the nation. On behalf of our officers, our board of directors, our members, our donors, our community partners and friends, I want to welcome you to this 2021 Social Justice Summit. Special thanks to our Chancellor, Jean Block, and Associate Chancellor of Alumni Affairs, Julie Sina, for joining us today. We'd love to have you guys. Thank you for coming. And for those of you that don't know, UCLA Black Alumni Association was founded in 1968 to be, our mission was to be a source of support and networking and engagement for our alumni, as well as providing much needed scholarship dollars to our incoming African-American students, the donations of which you've heard Levant share. And we actually, as challenging as 2020 was, it was a great year for UBA. We've raised over the course of time about $6 million towards scholarships for students. And just last year alone, we were able to raise over $1.5 million. So really thankful for that. As it pertains to social justice, Black Bruins have been involved in some of the greatest movements and accomplishments and advancements in social justice throughout history. Whether we're talking about Angela Davis or Jackie Robinson, the Freedom Riders or Bunchy Carter, the divestment from South Africa, or just increasing greater representation on UCLA campus. Black Bruins and Black Bruin alumni have always been here. So as we move into what's probably the most, or move out of, thankfully, the most disruptive year in recent history, we are hopeful about the future. We're hopeful about a great many things, and yet we have to be sober about what it is that we're still facing as a community. Social justice is not achieved with the changing of a president. We know that. It's achieved by the sheer will of a community to educate, to organize, and to lift our voices to be heard. And UBA takes that responsibility very, very seriously. And so that's why we're here at this, our third Social Justice Summit, despite COVID, despite the craziness that happens every day that makes you just go, what's going on? We are determined to make an impact in 2021. And we want to challenge every member, every supporter, everyone that hears my voice or that attends this conference to think about how and where you can make an impact in 2021, whether that's partnering with us or doing something in your community. It's important. And we know that as a volunteer organization, we could not do it without the partnerships that we forge with our fellow alumni. Today's event will focus on something that's near and dear to us as an organization, as parents, as educators and advocates, and that's the inequities in education for our young people. UBA was proud to host 2 panels this past summer on educating our children through the COVID crisis with the intent of providing support and resources to parents struggling with the changes due to the shutdown. And today's panel will specifically speak to unmasking the educational disparities occurring in a COVID world. By no means do we want to suggest that these challenges sprung up because of COVID. They've certainly been there long before the virus came, but COVID has given us the ability to shine a laser microscope on those disparities through the lens of social justice. And to help lay out the table, as best I can say, I have the pleasure of bringing up one of our board of directors, a past UBA president, and CEO of New World Education, Manla Kaise.
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks again for your leadership. Congratulations on another incredibly successful Social Justice Summit. Really appreciate what you've been able to facilitate to us and provide to our alumni base. I want to go ahead and do my job of introducing our opening presentation, our opening speaker. We're very fortunate to have him here, especially on short notice. I don't think anyone could better lay the foundation for today's discussion. As Michelle said, looking at educational disparities under COVID, but doing so in full recognition of the broader context in terms of educational injustices and inequities across the pipeline that exist in general, and as she shared, has been exacerbated by the COVID crisis. Our speaker is D'Artagnan Scorza, someone that I have grown to know and love over the past about 15 years that we've been engaged with one another. Through his work, he has established his own, what we like to call a hashtag Black Bruin legacy, which he is building upon, and also building upon our shared legacy as a Black alumni cohort. D'Artagnan served as the access coordinator for the African Student Union as a returning student, returning from the Iraq War, in which he served as a veteran and participant. After serving on ASU, he became the UC student regent, where he served students across the UC system, providing a voice at a critical time when we were looking at a resurgence, looking for a resurgence in Black admissions, not only at UCLA, but across the UC system. He pulled together a statewide UC Access conference that was attended and participated by students across the UC system. After serving on the regents, D'Artagnan completed his doctorate at UCLA in education, simultaneously founding his own nonprofit organization, the Social Justice Learning Institute, which has brought a dynamic and innovative new approach to looking at educational inequalities to South LA, particularly in his home city of Inglewood, and branching out from there, serving students across the region. He then was elected as the school board, as a school board member in Inglewood, and served as the president of the Inglewood School Board. He has recently left both posts as he's now the former president of the Inglewood School Board and the former founding executive director of Social Justice Learning Institute, and will become the first director of racial equity for the County of Los Angeles. So we have someone who, in his experience, has not only provided him with the insight and the experience and the work that would allow us to understand these educational inequities as they are manifesting in our schools right now. And as I shared with Michelle, I would like to suggest that this is one of our emerging leaders, one of our best hopes, I would say, to have a Black Bruin in a major elective office in the short term. He's a rising star in that way, and I am honored to introduce him and to have been had a front row seat to his development over the years. So without further ado, I will give you our opening presenter, D'Artagnan Scorza.
Well, thank you so much for that phenomenal introduction, Manla and Michelle. I could not be more honored to be here with you all today. My love for UBAA goes back far, back to the days where Manla talked about, the days when we were working to organize and ensure that UCLA lived up to its promise of equity and access for all. Largely focused on improving admissions for African-American students and recognizing how policies and practices can get in the way of equity. And so largely what I've been brought on board to do with Los Angeles County now is to help the county explore the ways in which its own policies, practices, and procedures may be affecting inequities and or exacerbating racial disparities for our residents here, for our roughly 10.1 million residents here in Los Angeles. So I'm excited to join you all today. Proud to be a Bruin. I also currently serve as the president of the UCLA Alumni Association. And so I think the opportunity to really build upon a strong legacy that has been laid prior to my arrival by many Black Bruins who have fought for justice exists. And I'm excited about what we're able to do, especially now, given everything that's happened over this past week. It is more important that we continue to fight for justice, that we stand for liberty, that we call upon both our local, civic, and also statewide and national leaders to help stand strong. So today we're going to kick this off with an unapologetic conversation that's focused on race and higher education. And so I'm going to talk to you a bit about some of what the research shows leads to the disparities that we experience in higher ed and the disparities that our young folk experience in higher ed, but also speak about how that ties into this current conversation about anti-racism. And so it is no longer sufficient for us to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, right? Instead, we must focus on what it means to actively pursue policies, to actively engage in practices that are going to close disparities, that are going to close the gaps for our young folk. But before we actually talk about that, we have to start with an understanding of what constitutes the opportunities that our young folk can pursue, as well as what influences the disadvantage that a lot of our young folk may face as well. So we know, and this draws upon the research coming from one of my colleagues, Arnold Chandler at Forward Change and Tia Martinez, and what they have been able to do is pull together sort of a body of work that lifts up the ways in which our lives are affected over the sort of course that we experience, right? They call it the life course framework. And what we realize is that people often start with dimensions of human development, namely our physical, cognitive, mental health, and our socio-emotional skills that are developed over time through our experiences in community. As we grow older, we begin to, we work to achieve certain life course outcomes or milestones, i.e. being able to enter school ready to learn, graduate high school, or in some cases, and for some folk in our communities, like my father and my own siblings, maybe have faced incarceration, and in many places dealing with issues like being over-policed and underemployed. Furthermore, given the environment and the economic conditions we face, many of our families and many of our young folk are dealing with issues related to housing and homelessness or houselessness, as well as living next to places like oil fields and in or the Exide battery plants, or in places where they face environmental challenges. All of these things combined make up sort of what a set of ecological and contextual factors that influence our opportunities. Our choice is situated within the context of this. So people often say, well, you know, why didn't people make better decisions coming from the neighborhoods they come from? Well, the truth is, you can only make the choice that is available to you, right? If the opportunity does not exist, you cannot choose that thing. So for example, if you live in a neighborhood that is considered to be a food desert and you don't have access to healthy food, if you don't have access to grocery stores, or those grocery stores are miles away, you cannot make choices to eat healthier food because it does not exist. So our opportunities are limited. And what Raj Chetty's work talks about, who's an economist at Harvard, is he says, look, greater than family, greater than sort of employment, the place and the container that holds, the container that holds inequity is place, right? It's the neighborhood, it's the social and the physical and environmental material conditions you grow up in. And so all of that influences the choices that we're able to make. And so what that leads to is often intergenerational disadvantage. So when you have declining employment and earnings, and families are not able to sustain their ability to take care of themselves, and you combine that with local, state, and federal policies, as well as sort of the institutional practices that many of our systems uphold, it leads to essentially a growth in disadvantaged families. And what that often means is that families and children in subsequent generations experience stagnant educational attainment. And there's specifically, there are gender-specific effects upon the life course that our young folk experience. And so Black males, Latino males, Native American males may experience different outcomes relative to their female counterparts. Now, all of that combined leads to intergenerational disadvantage. So if you lack ongoing opportunities to pursue a living wage and pursue employment that's going to help you take care of your family and take care of yourself, that cycle becomes intergenerational once you have children. And what we are finding, especially in the Black community and the African American community, is that even if you move into the middle class, and even if you move into the upper middle class, or if you move into sort of an upper income level, what Arnold and our team has talked about is something called the thwarted striver framework, that Black folk are more likely to lose wealth over generations because of the historical patterns of social inequality, as well as because of not only structural racism, but because of specific federal, state, and local policies that uphold institutional racism in our society. For example, the remnants of the 1929 Federal Housing Administration's policies on redlining, et cetera. So we continue to experience declining wealth over time. And I think many of us can talk about that now as we see greater degrees of gentrification, as we see the loss of homes during this pandemic, et cetera. And what that ultimately leads to is this concentrated disadvantage in neighborhoods. And so you have a rise in concentrated poverty, not just white flight, right? And not just the lack of influence, but the concentration of affluence in certain neighborhoods. And then you get higher rates of things like crime, violence, poor school quality, et cetera. Now, if we're going to talk about undoing these effects, and we're going to talk about how that sort of shows up for us in higher education, we got to talk about anti-racism. Again, it's not sufficient for us to just talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what is anti-racism? According to the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, it is essentially the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies and practices, as well as the attitudes, so that power is redistributed and shared equitably. And so in thinking about that, we often, we want to use this term anti-racism so that we can fundamentally reimagine the social systems that we exist within, as well as acknowledge their colossal unseen dimensions. So take for example, this past Wednesday, where we saw the way in which the Capitol Police responded to the rioters and the insurrectionists, right, on Capitol Hill, very different from the way they responded to Black Lives Matter protesters over this summer, right? Those are institutional decisions. That is the government choosing to act in a certain way against one population versus another. It's not just about awareness, because often people say, oh, go get educated, educate yourself, learn more, let's make people more aware. It's really about reimagining the ways in which power is distributed and the ways in which it remains in the hands of the same groups in order to maintain disadvantage for others. Now, some of the young folk I've worked with explored some of these questions. What does it mean to be anti-racist in higher education? Especially given some of the challenges we know we face in the K-12 system. And we can't talk about the pool. I don't want to talk about the pool anymore, right? People often say, oh, it's because of the pool. Well, truthfully, it's because of the not only lack of investment, but because of the institutional challenges and barriers that exist, both coming from K-12, but also in higher education. So we'll talk a little bit about that right now. Our young folk engage in what's called youth participatory action research, which is a process whereby youth conduct research and move their voice from the margins and the periphery to the center. It motivates intellectual and social engagement by encouraging youth and students to explore meaningful questions. It allows them to build knowledge through social inquiry with peers, educators, and community members. And it works toward a more participatory and inclusive public sphere to create change in schools and communities. And so the folk that are most affected by the problem take that problem on, they evaluate that problem, they conduct research, and then they come up with solutions. Our young folk have conducted graduate level and higher research to help produce policy recommendations to transform their material conditions. And what we find is that, and what they found in higher education is that race, ethnicity, and gender, as well as poverty, not only continues to create barriers in higher education with low rates of things like persistence and completion among students of color, but also obviously the income gap continues to contribute to some of the challenges that our students face once they get into higher education. So institutions and organizational leaders need to ensure that youth of color who enroll in post-secondary educational institutions actually complete their degrees and persist, that they actually do well, and that we provide opportunities for access in the first place. And so our students ask the question, what are the barriers, both systemic or including systemic, institutional, individual, et cetera, that boys and young men of color face, that students of color more broadly face when attempting to persist through post-secondary education? And what they found were a set of emerging themes, namely that there's a need to create equitable school day practices, that often our institutions are not designed to support students who come from multiple backgrounds. That, class scheduling, for example, is a significant challenge. That, the way in which many of our students who are struggling financially have to survive is that they have to go get a job, right? They physically have to work in order to go to school at the same time. When I was an undergrad at UCLA, I had to work 30 hours a week. And so I had to work 30 hours a week. I was working at In-N-Out in Westwood, 30 hours a week, just to pay for my bills, just to keep a roof over my head and eat food while I was going to school here at UCLA as an undergrad. That alone takes away the time that our students who would otherwise be able to study, right? It takes away their time from studying when other students who may not have those economic challenges are able to do the same. And so we have to think about non-traditional ways for our students to be successful when they enter into higher education. So they ask their peers, what are some of the barriers you face when you're trying to persist through and graduate college? And so many of them said, look, I don't even have the courses I need to actually finish, right? I can't even get the courses I need to finish on time. So we often see our students taking longer to graduate and persist. They also said that, look, if we actually offer classes at a time that were convenient for us, like the evenings, then we may actually minimize some of the scheduling conflicts associated with work and travel. A second emerging theme that they found was that students often lack the academic support they need when transitioning from high-need K-12 institutions, i.e. access to materials and technology, as well as study groups and or access to quality tutoring. Now, UCLA, I think, has done a really good job. And there are certain institutions that have provided for programs like the Academic Advancement Program, which Manla and many folk were instrumental in helping to build and strengthen, which came out of, as many of you know, the High Potential Program, which, by the way, our current Secretary of State, Shirley Weber, participated in. She was a member of the High Potential Program when she was here as an undergrad at UCLA. So these types of programs can produce the people and the leaders we need for tomorrow. So students were asked, how much of a barrier is access to quality advising? Well, look at this, right? 89% of our students said, look, they need dynamic academic advising. Right? They often lack that, and it makes it difficult for them to persist or get through school. They also said that they found that, that opportunities that they face challenges receiving opportunities similar to their white and or Asian counterparts. Finally, as an emerging theme, students mentioned that they lacked financial resources and the literacy they needed to pay for and navigate higher education. They lacked an effective financial aid formula to help them persist, making sure they can afford housing. We know that housing has become a significant issue for a lot of our families. They lacked the effective transportation. They could not afford to live here nearby or on the campus. And navigating financial institutions and systems were significant barriers and challenges for them. And so many of them said, 93% of them said that they did not have enough money, that their financial aid package was a barrier for them to persisting and being successful. They also said that on-campus housing was a barrier for them, that it was not affordable, right? 85% of them recognized that they could not afford to actually be on campus. Furthermore, many of our students recognize that racism played a significant role. Now, look, we can talk about finances all we want, but I often use this as an example. If you are a Black woman and you live in an affluent and wealthy community, if you live, for example, in a well-to-do community like View Park or Windsor Hills or Ladera Heights here in Los Angeles County, you can still go to the doctor and that doctor will treat you in a way that is not consistent with the care that he or she may provide to our white and our Asian counterparts. For example, there was a physician that we just heard about a few weeks ago in Indiana, right? A Black physician who complained of pain that she was experiencing, who was diagnosed with COVID, and she was a physician herself, went to her white physician colleagues and said, this is what I'm experiencing. And they completely ignored her needs. And she died 3 weeks later from COVID. She recorded it, posted it on social media, and let people know this is what racism it feels like in our society, right? So not only is it a result of sort of the structural and institutional barriers that we face, but it's also a result of the private actions that people take. So if you're gonna move towards an anti-racist society, we have to think about these in sort of a multidimensional 3D way so we can ultimately address discrimination that our young folk and that our families experience, not only in our campuses and on our campuses, but also in our society. Now, what does it look like to take action? Especially in higher education, we need to begin to ask ourselves which group feels most at home. If our students consistently complain about not feeling at home on our campuses, that is a problem. It is very much and fundamentally a problem. We should also ask which norms, values, and perspectives does the institution consider to be normal or legitimate? Which ones do we uphold? Which ones do we silence? And who inhibits and inhabits those positions of power? What do the people look like? Who's in that space making decisions on behalf of the communities that they're supposed to reflect and serve? And then again, who are the people in charge of influencing the laws and or policies and systems that create the outcomes that our young folk deal with, as well as whose interest does the institution protect? Finally, some of the things that we can do, and I'll begin to wrap up here, is we can interrogate our own positionality. Think about how we interact with our colleagues. Think about how you interact with folk on your campus, as well as the ways in which folk are being promoted, or the ways in which barriers have emerged when it comes to representing people of color in staffing and faculty positions on and off the campus. And then think about how our identities shape the way in which we relate to the people we serve and our colleagues. Right? We can interrogate our own places, not only as alums, but also as institutional actors who have a role to play in facilitating anti-racism in higher education. We can furthermore take on racial hierarchies, because ultimately racism is about maintaining power over people and recognizing which people have power over others. It resides not only in external, in social institutions and norms, but also within our psyche. And we have to undo the racist beliefs that have been internalized by those who both uphold systems of oppression, but those who are also recipients of racism as well. Now, I'll close by saying that if we really want to move towards an anti-racist approach here, not only in higher education, but in our work collectively, and you can apply this to your own work in your own career, in your own field, we have to think about the content that we use, the authors we rely upon, the sources that we go to, the people that we revere, the folk that we lift up in our society and call upon to help lead us, right? Who are those people that we call upon? And do they look like us? Do they look like me? Do they look like you? We have to challenge our beliefs about what we constitute as being an ideal student or an ideal person or an ideal worker or an ideal team member, right? what is considered to be ideal? And how do you uphold these social norms in a way that actually denigrates or may disadvantage others in your own workplace or workspace or classroom or otherwise? We can interrogate the relationship between race, gender, and class because we, if you notice thus far, have not yet talked about trans people, right? To what extent are we evaluating our own perspectives and biases even against people who may associate with a different gender identity, right? How are we even having conversations about Black trans people in our society and the way in which they show up, even at church, even in our communities? And dare I be heretical right now to say that there's a lot of work we have to do within our own communities to evaluate our own belief systems and challenge the way in which we uphold racism against people who may have a different sexual identity from ours. We can explore and incorporate an anti-racist approach to our work, i.e. evaluate the PPPs, right? The 3 Ps, policies and procedures and practices. How does that affect promotability? How does that affect your positionality within an organization? And then we can also fight for and ensure equitable access to resources and services. Folks, I will tell you, when I think about this work, I always go to the budget. Go to the budget. Look for where the money is being spent, right? I don't care about the chicken dinners. I want to know on the operational side, how is my organization spending money? And is it spending money that is consistent with the ways in which anti-racist policies, practices, and the procedures can be lifted up and or expressed? Where is that money being spent? Focus on the money. You'll determine whether your organization is actually upholding racism. So with that being said, I will close our conversation today. I don't think I have time for Q&A, but I know that you're going to have a really robust panel, and I hope this will certainly help you create dialogue and expand upon the conversation that you're having thus far. I am deeply and immensely grateful, Michelle and Manla, for the invitation. I look forward to continuing this conversation, and yes, I will share a copy of the presentation.
Wow.
Wow.
Can we give D'Artagnan an incredible round of applause, everyone, for that? Yeah, the finger snaps, reaction buttons, whatever you want to use. Please appreciate what we've been treated to. And I just wanted to really give a heartfelt thanks to D'Artagnan for joining us today. He did it on short notice. He brought an incredible presentation together. He shared some visuals to allow us to really connect with it. Dart, you can see from the chat bar the number of requests for a copy of your presentation. I'll let you decide if and when and how you might be able to share that. But really great setup for an incredible discussion that we want to have. We did not plan, Dart, to do an immediate Q&A, but if you're able to stick around, I'm sure our moderator for the panel discussion can find ways to kind of include you in that and allow you to contribute to that discussion. We do have a pretty robust group of folks for the panel discussion, but I'm sure that's possible. Having said that, and thank D'Artagnan, I also want to do one last correction. I'm sure Chancellor Block and Julie Steiner would consider it an oversight if I did not also point out that Dart is our current president of our UCLA Alumni Association. So can't overlook that part of his title in this audience. So yes, he's been doing great things and continuing to serve his community and his alma mater as he does so, giving generously of his time, of his intellect, and of his energy. So just want to thank him again. Couldn't be prouder of him. I'm so happy that it occurred to us to turn to him in this moment to provide that opening. And I'll turn it back over to our president, Michelle Johnson, to introduce our moderator.
Thank you, Manla. And thank you, Dr. Scorza, for that presentation. That was wonderful. He's put it in the chat for those of you that wanted to have it for later reference. At this time, I have the honor of bringing forth the moderator for today. His name is Anthony Jackson. He is the Director of Community School Transformation in LAUSD's Local District West. He leads principals in advancing the responsive transformation of their schools to empower and elevate learning outcomes for African American and Latinx students. He received his master's in education from Cal State Dominguez Hills, and he is currently completing his doctorate in educational leadership at UCLA. Family, please welcome Anthony Jackson.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate it. I just slid in here, and I got to say, man, I missed Dr. Scores and D'Artagnan. What's happening? Congratulations on the new gig, but obviously that means I won't get to work with you as part of Local District West. The last time we connected was there, and it's like, but I get to vibe off your wonderful opening here, the part that I caught, and I wish I had an opportunity to get more of it, because man, it's obvious you set the stage, and I feel like I missed some critical pieces to help moderate this conversation. But I do need to say that there's some wonderful, wonderful folks on here. We have some student leaders who are direct sort of descendants and part of the lineage of the student empowerment movement at UCLA, which was something that, Manla, myself, a bunch of wonderful folks, John Caldwell, I see Levant, Bobby Grace, that we all came up through, right? Which really set us up for kind of approaching the world in terms of ways of being, doing, knowing, and becoming in really, really empowered and unapologetic ways, as far as advocating for ourselves first, and also for those who came after us. And this is an example of that work. Manla, kudos to you and Bobby specifically for all that you've done. I am an elementary educator, and it's interesting that I want to try to engage from that standpoint in terms of having a conversation with some folks around higher ed specifically. But I think there's some poignant links that we can make between K-12 and then obviously the community college and university levels in terms of education. I think they're real. I do want to say this. I had the opportunity back when I was a teacher to be taught how to deliver the history social studies curriculum starting from the present, especially when I was a 5th grade teacher. We started with the present and then worked backwards, rather than starting with something that was so abstract that kids couldn't even relate to. We started with the present and then we're back. And I actually want to try to use that, just go back in my teaching mode, as in terms of how it is we open up this discussion. I was hoping to basically, I thought, Michelle, you're going to introduce the panelists and at least give them a little love, or shall I allow them to introduce themselves? Because I think
I'll introduce them. I probably would be the best person to do so, but I will ask you to chime in on one of the panelists with whom I'm less familiar. But
absolutely.
So first of all, among the students, we have an incredible young high school student that I am so proud of. I've watched her move in and around the office of the Community Coalition, where she was a youth leader at her alma mater, Crenshaw High, or where she currently attends. And she now is the student representative on the Los Angeles Unified School Board. Kamari Brown. So if we can give her a round of applause. Kamari is an incredible young leader and representing students about as well as they can be represented across the district right now from her seat on the school board. We also have 2 outstanding young leaders from UCLA, one of which is a graduate of my alma mater, Hamilton High School. I always have to shout out those Yankee Bruins wherever they exist. We are a thing. The co-chairs of the UCLA African Student Union, Alex Dunkel and Simone Walker, if we could give them a round of applause. 2 outstanding young UCLA undergraduates who are not only providing leadership and engaged in their own scholarship in the classroom, but they're taking UCLA through a particular pivotal moment as they facilitate and advocate and are a part of the planning of UCLA's upcoming Black Resource Center, which just secured some space. They have an interim director. It's a dream for Black students at UCLA, at least 5 years of work of advocacy. So if we give them a round of applause for facilitating that. Also, among our teacher panelists, we have someone who is very near and dear to me. I remember her as an undergrad and the work she did on campus, and she's now just really bringing her empowerment to LA Unified as a teacher. She's facilitating empowerment in the classroom. She's been recognized in the news media for her work in the COVID context, making that pivot, showing people how to continue to engage students, support students, and empower students despite the challenges of the virtual environment. She's a teacher at Augustus Hawkins High School, Kiara Williams. If we could give her a round of applause. And we have one other panelist, actually possibly two, I think, Anthony. I saw both Bootsy and Tanika there, so you can take those introductions before you begin.
Yeah, thanks, Marlon, and welcome to the panelists. Hey, Kamari, I told Marlon I don't think I should be the one to invite you because we've leaned on you heavily in the work with the heat and because Crenshaw High School is one of the schools, but it's good to see you. The first person I want to introduce is a colleague of mine. I work really closely with her. She's a fantastic and phenomenal educator. Bootsy Battle Hope is a national board certified teacher in mathematics and currently serves as a secondary math teacher advisor for humanizing education for equitable transformation. That's the HEAT acronym stands, that's what the HEAT acronym means. And, Bootsy participates in curriculum development, frequent convenings at local, state, and federal education policy. So she's a policy, but not a policy wonk, right? She represents policy wokeness in terms of how it is that she impacts what's occurring at the federal and state level. She is a UCLA alum, okay? Also her MA is CSUDH, just like me. She is an LAUSD and LA County Teacher of the Year. So she brings it. Now, what you guys don't know is she was Scholar Kamari's a teacher at Marina Del Rey Middle School. And so we've already had them come together and do some work. She actually interviewed her as part of a conversation for our teachers in our program. So Bootsy is awesome. The other person I want to introduce to you is someone who's super dear to me. She actually was the principal at a charter school that I co-founded back in the day, Cultural and Language Academy of Success. Dr. Tanika Orange works at UCLA Center X. She is a scholar. She is on my dissertation committee, so I got to get this right. No, but basically, Tanika works for Center X and is doing some major work around equity and making sure that, as associate director of the Principal Leadership Institute, and how we raise up, school leaders and a social justice orientation, and making sure that they are not operating from a deficit perspective and actually are truly about equity, and specifically racial equity, right? And gender equity and a number of other equities that I think fall under that broad umbrella, sometimes I think too broad, of educational equity. She is a true scholar and brings a great deal of a scholarly, I think, leadership to helping principals think about how it is that they can lead their schools. She's recently published in Tyrone Howard's newest work, All Students Must Thrive. She's, doing some fantastic stuff. We worked together back in the day. Her daughters were students at our charter school that we ran, and she's just beautiful people. And I've known her a long time. And so it's cool to bring both of them to this work, to this panel, and to share the ideas with the rest of y'all. So thank you so much. I see people in there. Yeah, Levant, your kids went to class too. It's some class folks up in here. And so we'll make sure we carry that mantra of aspire, affirm, attain, right? That was class's motto in this. So let me get back to this whole idea of starting with the present. I was on a 2-day workshop around basically equity and standards, and it started on Wednesday when January 6th rolled out. And unfortunately, doing what any good teacher knows not to do, the presenters just moved forward like we weren't experiencing something major occurring in the country at the time, right? Just kept teaching, so nobody could focus. Everybody was actually on their phones watching the news events unfold, and so I don't want to do that. I think it's such a critical issue, and I hope to make some connections to the conversation we have today about what is occurring right now, right? In terms of white supremacy just on fleek, if as the kids say, right? Just not even without shame, all up in our face, and what that means in terms of how it is that our young people, how they're seeing the world, how they're moving through it, and their ways of, as I said earlier, ways of being and doing, knowing and becoming. And I'm really interested to hear our young folks talk about what they witnessed and then relate it back to some of the work that they're currently doing in terms of how it is that we continue to fight the good fight, as Derek Bell would say, that beautiful struggle, right? That is so necessary, for us to really overcome what we're faced with. And so I don't know. I think the best way to do this is really open it up to our youth and ask them, our youngsters, these student leaders, what's your take on that, so that we can get that out the way and then dig deeper into some of the issues that Dr. Scorza introduced around just some of the structural issues that are in the way of us doing what we need to do.
Can you repeat the question? I couldn't really hear.
Yeah, what are your thoughts about what happened on Wednesday, Kamari, Scholar Kamari? I know you have some thoughts about it, right? And let me ask you this: since you're currently in high school, I want to ask you. I just asked another high school senior, ASB president in Washington. What would you hope to, when you go back on Tuesday? What would you hope that discussion is like, right? In class around what we've just witnessed.
So I want to start off by saying, hi everybody, I'm Kamari Brown, and I'm so pleased to be here. But as far as Wednesday, because I'm a news watcher, I watch the news with my granny all the time. She forced me into it, but then I started to like it. But it was just so crazy. If it had to be a word, it was just crazy. And I was just baffled because it was like, wow. I was just in awe and just watching this, because let it be somebody let it be Black Lives Matter. It wouldn't even be a conversation. It would have been hashtags of another Black person being dead. It wouldn't even, like I said, would not even be a conversation. It just would have been another trending topic about long live so and so. So yeah, I was in awe. And when I go back to school on Tuesday, I just hope that we can keep that conversation going, because I feel like it is an important conversation we need to have, especially in schools, especially at schools like mine that are with predominantly Black kids. I feel like we have to talk about and let out our feelings about things that happen like that, because that was racist at its finest. And I think we have to have conversations like that. So yeah.
Wonderful. Some of our other student leaders, I see Simone and Alex and others. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts about, and related to the current, sort of work that you're doing in terms of your leadership currently at the university level.
Yeah, I would definitely say, like Kamari, I'm also a news watcher because I used to watch things with my grandma, and then I ended up liking it. But I was also in class at the time, and I also, like you said, had a professor who just kept professing. I went to the other room to talk to my roommate, do you see the news? And she's like, yeah, but I'm in class. And I'm like, me too. Why? My professor kind of mentioned it one sentence at the beginning of class, but if I'm being completely honest, I have no clue what happened in the entire lecture, because I was sitting there watching CNN, flipping back and forth from CNN to NBC to ABC, trying to figure out what is going on. And I think another thing that really had a lot to do with it was right after that lecture, I had a discussion. I was the only Black student in that discussion. So seeing these people at the Capitol climbing up buildings, breaking into buildings, I was literally in awe, like Kamari said, and I sent a message in the chat, and I was like the curfew has been enacted in DC, for anybody that's not watching the news, and nobody acknowledged it, not the TA, not a classmate, nothing. So it was just very does nobody else see this? Is nobody else affected by what's going on right now? Because like I said, I have no clue what was happening in class because I couldn't focus. And I just feel like that's really, I don't even know the words to use. Unfair, confusing. Yeah.
Thank you. Awesome. And I just got a shout out. I'm looking, and I'll be right with you, Alex. I'm just seeing Chancellor Block on here. And I knew he was supposed to be here. Greeting, Chancellor Block. Got a little nervous now, but that's okay. No, I'm good. I'm good. Alex, let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, I think for me, it was kind of eye-opening because like a lot of times you think of like these types of people or these types of groups as like their enemies, like of this. You don't think of them as like something that could be like accepted almost. And I think kind of seeing the way that they were able to storm, like this is supposed to be the heart of like America's democracy, and they were so easily able to just go in there and just literally defecate on things and just kind of just demolish what that stands for. And I think to me it kind of showed like kind of in comparison to Black Lives Matter protesters and stuff, that like Black people kind of get this kind of inherent criminality, I feel like, from like the United States government, because these were literally people that were in like the heart of democracy, the literal capital, with like threatening senators and congressmen, and just literally like destroying this symbol of democracy. When you have Black Lives Matter protesters, we're literally just protesting for their lives, and I think like the stark reaction between those two is really just eye-opening to me. But yeah.
Thank you. What about other students? If anybody else wants to share, because I want to also make sure we connect it to some of the other things that are going on structurally. I think what we saw was a manifestation of some of the structural things, but obviously the structural piece is so much more insidious and quiet, but just as equally sort of damaging in terms of how it is that it prevents, Black students in particular from reaching their full potential. And so I want to try to make that connection in some ways. I mean, basically, structurally, I'm thinking of Prop 15 and 16, and what we just witnessed there, just most recently, kind of connected to the events that took place, because they were all based around the election and a whole bunch of myths, untruths and lies that were framed. But we know that a number of folks, even here in the state of California, and specifically here in the Los Angeles area, still don't see the need to, affirmative action took another loss. And I'm like, wow, how'd that happen given where we are? But I think we get to see what happened in Washington, D.C., and it paints a really stark picture for us. So anyway, what about Kiara? I'm interested in because I want to work our way up and then get to the heart of the matter, the higher ed piece. But in terms of those students who you'll be sending to UCLA soon, right? What do you think your conversations with those students will be around this from a teacher's perspective, and a teacher who's doing fantastic work, as Manla introduced?
Thank you. I've been actually pondering on this for a while now as I try to figure out how I feel about it first, right? I have to humanize myself and acknowledge my feelings to then be able to support my students. I can't be a wreck or a mess and then have them rely on me. So I've been spending a lot of time reflecting and talking about how I feel with my family and friends. I think I've decided that next week when I start teaching, the first thing we're going to do is acknowledge it. There will not be an elephant in my room, in my classroom, in my virtual classroom. We're going to acknowledge it and we're going to address it. And I think it's important that as a teacher, as a leader of that classroom, as the facilitator, that I name it what it is: racism, right? White supremacy, white privilege, right? These terms. So I've already taught these terms to my students, so they're familiar, but I think it's an opportunity to teach them, to talk about them, to see how they're manifesting in our country, right? So this is what we mean when we say white supremacy, because I think sometimes we throw those terms around a lot without concrete examples for students. So students don't necessarily see how it's playing out. They know the term, but they're like, okay, yeah, it's not that true. It's not happening that much anymore. It's not real, or as real as when slavery existed. But when you have events like this, I think it's important to connect it back. Like, no, this is an example of white supremacy. This is an example of white privilege. And I think the next step is, I'm an English teacher. And so I am extremely concerned with reading and writing skills and even speaking skills. But I think it is extremely appropriate and necessary that my first assignment be centered around the events that happen, right? So how are you feeling? Maybe it's a reflection piece where we, or I allow students to dig deeper into their feelings and reflect on how they are feeling about it. Or, I mean, some sort of action. So I saw that Scorza talked about YPAR, I'm familiar with that. And so having students do some sort of action behind it, right? What are we gonna do? Are we writing letters? Are we gonna do a video? Are we gonna film it? How are we going to respond to this? Because I think it is important that people of color, specifically my Black students, feel heard, validated, and that someone took the time out of their day to make sure that they processed it and spoke about it. And I think that is how you heal and move forward. If you're not given that opportunity, that chance, it stays with you and it manifests into other things that you then lose control over, right? Like anger or this or that, or whatever the case may be. So I think it is important that you make space, that I will make space starting next week so that students have that freedom to discuss and then heal.
Wonderful, thank you. Boosie, you wanna chime in just a bit? I mean, go ahead.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so I really wanted to talk about the structure piece that you're bringing up. You know, I was in those 2 days with you, as you know, and the fact that we are locked into structures that are connected to whiteness, right? This idea that we follow plans to the T and we have curriculum that is set for us and we have to cover a certain amount of material. Like these are all, this sort of lack of flexibility is part of white structures, right? And so I think that when we talk about doing the anti-racist work, a lot of that has to be about how do we incorporate ideas of flexibility, incorporate ideas of multiple perspectives, right? When I think about our school day and the way that our school day is structured, right? That kids need to be in a certain place at a certain time when you tell them, and that the teacher needs to go over a certain material. I mean, I felt for the presenters, I felt the anxiety of, I have this curriculum that I've been told to get through. This is what they're paying me to get through. And the world is burning behind me, but I have to like stay on point, right? And I hear this from teachers who I'm working with all the time, like, well, how do I get through chapter 2? How do I get through chapter 3? You know, and I'm like, you know, you can bring something of chapter 2 or chapter 3 into the world, into what you're doing, but we are here, you know, working with human beings. We're not working with just, you know, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and taking the square root. You know what I mean? So if you got to start in the place. And so one of the things that we work on with teachers in the HEAT community is taking the curriculum and the books that they have and, you know, infusing our kids into the work. That doesn't just mean changing the names, but that's like, you could take those concepts that are in the math material and keep that high level rigor, and at the same time create a scenario, word problem, a task that has to do with life, right? So I think, you know, any teacher who doesn't transform the curriculum on Tuesday or whatever day they come in the door has really missed an opportunity. I see some of that work happening on Facebook and across the community. Some people are writing some lessons, but I think, you know, as a math teacher, math is one of those places where people feel it's a safe space to just follow along because, you know, oh, it's math, it's numbers, there's nothing, you know, social, there's no social connection with that. We're just going to learn how to do our operations or whatever. But, you know, every single content area needs to be ready to take the plunge to do, you know, what to break out of that structure of this set curriculum. And what just one more thing, Dr. Scorza, when he talks about following the money, we know that our curriculum writers and our curriculum companies, those are the big money people in education, right? So those are the folks who feel threatened when teachers like us start to bring in new material. Like, oh no, that's not in your chapter. You know, well, you know what? This is in my kids' lives. So your chapter and how much you're getting paid to write that chapter are going to be, you know, on the shelf on the side. So.
Right. Thanks so much. So Dr. Orange, bring a faculty and staff sort of perspective as we work up through this. I got to ask you, it doesn't appear that D'Artagnan's here, but I want to ask you, what does it mean that we have some UCLA students here who, something that you might expect in the K-12 space, but at the university space, basically continuing on with a lecture as if nothing happened, given what was occurring from your perspective, obviously. And one thing I left out, Dr. Orange is the director for Culture and Equity Project at UCLA Center X. And so what does that mean? I'm really interested to get your take on that.
So, alumni of UCLA myself.
Yeah.
I really think consistently about, especially from the Graduate School of Ed and just the school in general, about how we always promote social justice and equity. But we really have to be deliberate and radical about the way we think about that and do that. And that often does not, going back to just the keynote, just often is not perpetuated in our policies, practices, and procedures. I go back to James Baldwin, who says, progress is just not enough. It's not enough just to say we've made some strides and that we can do certain things. We shouldn't have to struggle to find money to support African-American students financially. We shouldn't have to struggle to have professors that can come inside of a space, and are able to talk about the present social political context that impacts every single thing that we do. Just like in a personal experience about that, I just think about Dr. Jackson, soon to be Dr. Jackson, just the notion that African-American students coming into a space at the Graduate School of Ed, and there's some departments that haven't had a Black student, I think, in almost 7 years. That's not deliberate, and that's not radical enough. We also have spaces where African-American students, even to come into our school, do not have Black representation around the things that they want to study, which is around Blackness and anti-racism, and often have to look to other professors who that's just not what they're interested in, right? A policy, I'm on soon to be Dr. Jackson's committee, but to fight to get me on there, because I'm one of the few in the graduate school who focuses on like cultural sustaining leadership and pedagogy, to fight because of a policy, because I'm not a tenured faculty member and really can't sit on a committee, is a disservice. So if we really truly want to support the students and recruit, and continuously, not just to recruit, we want diversity of thought, as one of my colleagues would always say, Dr. John Rogers, we want diversity of thought inside of these spaces. And to look at the young folks here, we have to be able to say that it is a family, and we really promote you not to just get there, but to promote you, what does that look like even when you're there and after the fact? We don't do a very good job at that right now. And it's a space, again, that I love. I think as far as you can't I just like Boots just said, you can't teach over the issues of what takes place. In the Principal Leadership Institute, I just speak to that particularly because I'm the assistant director there. We don't speak over that. And you can't, because this is really what we want leaders to come out and to be able to do. And if we don't model it, and if we don't promote it and push it and be deliberate and be radical about that inside of higher ed, then we just perpetuate inequity, like Cornel West would say. How do you perpetuate it in your own actions? And that's what typically we end up doing. So there are a lot of things that we need to do, and we're working on in some spaces, but it's important for folks to know the fight, even for just the folks of color, the professors and faculty of color. It's a constant struggle to make sure that we don't have just this facade of trust, that we're really building what relational trust looks like for students that sit in these spaces, for our students of color who are part of the LGBTQ community. There's just a lot that has to be done, and it is really trying to be deliberate and radical about it. And we surely are not there, right? Progress is not what we're looking for. We're looking for more than that.
Thank you. So I want to go back to Simone and Alex. I want to get a sense of some of what, and I apologize for not being able to be on time, but we were in another conference. Dr. Scorza mentioned around interrogating and evaluating institutional racism, and he got specific with some of the barriers that Black students experience, right? And from your standpoint as student leaders, both with ASU, what has worked for you in terms of how it is you navigate, negotiate, and speak your truth within, the larger kind of structure which we know, and we all love UCLA. I mean, I'm a Bruin through and through, but we still know we have some work to do, as Dr. Orange said. So Simone, what do you think? Tell me, how do you make it work?
I think the things that have I've been involved with ASU since I was a freshman, and I'm a third year now.
Okay.
And I have kind of tried a few different things, and the thing that has worked for me the best, or for Alex and I would say, is going directly to the administration. Even though you might have to wait 2 weeks to get a meeting, once you get in that meeting and you go in there with a tactical plan, we're going to talk about this from 12:05 to 12:10. We're going to talk about this from 12:11 to 12:15, and just kind of not applying pressure, but applying pressure. And making sure that all of the community's complaints are heard, and that there are action items tied to those complaints. So we're not talking to each other on Twitter and these things are falling on deaf ears. Just anytime that anything happens, making the university aware of it. So for instance, yesterday, the Bruin Republicans tweeted something that was just grossly transphobic. They said that transgenderism is a mental illness that deserves to be treated in a hospital, or that shouldn't be treated in hospital, something like that. They said that transgenderism is a mental illness. That was the tweet. So immediately I sent that tweet to people in Seoul. I sent that tweet to people that are working with the Black Resource Center. I sent that tweet to people who can help with that. So I think making our complaints heard and kind of being loud, even though the numbers are small, is our best chance, because kind of talking to each other doesn't work because there's only 4 or 5% of us. We actually met with Chancellor Block yesterday, and he might be tired of seeing our faces, but it's kind of a necessary conversation to have because nobody else is advocating for us.
Gotcha. Alex?
Yeah, and I think kind of building off what Simone is saying, mentioning it, I think that what really has kind of held dear to me is kind of just this thought of knowing that all the work that we're asking for, all the work or all the things that we're asking for are deserved. This is something that we're supposed to have, something that we shouldn't have to ask for. So I think that's been something that I've been very that I've held very dear to me as I've moved through ASU. I'm also Simone, I've been in ASU since I was a freshman. So I think just kind of always keeping that in mind that I'm asking for something that I should have already had, or that this campus should have already had. And then I think also building off of that, I think what Simone was saying about the idea of kind of being this community advocate is very important. Of I think talking to your community or working with your community, and then when you go to speak to admin, like Simone is saying, you kind of bring all those concerns with you. You're talking from their perspectives as a community. So I think that community piece is also really important in navigating higher ed.
Awesome. So in terms of Dr. Scorza's piece, especially around interrogating and evaluating institutional racism, and I know UCLA is committed, obviously, to the equity, diversity, and inclusion piece, especially at the higher ed level. I think a question has to be asked. So I'm a devotee of, we just had a conference Dr. Gholdy Muhammad presented. Those of you in the education space know who Dr. Bettina Love is. And so how do we ensure that equity, diversity, and inclusion at the higher ed level is not simply what Dr. Love, the scholar, a noted scholar, would say is just managing oppression? How do we make that work, right? Also then have, serious and lasting impacts on how it is that the university, right, sets up structures that benefit, first of all, Black students, but also all students. I think, and so I'm really interested to hear some thoughts about that, because I'm not sure, first of all, the whole idea of equity, man, for a minute there, I was really tired of hearing it because I felt it was missing the mark, because we were treating it in a very generic sense, in a very milquetoast sense, I say, and not really specifically getting at what we really mean when we talk about equity. And Dr. Sean Harper at USC's Race and Equity Center talks about that a lot, as does Tyrone Howard, right here in UCLA's Graduate School of Education. So what does that mean then? And I'm not sure who wants to get on that, Bootsy. I think you're chomping at the bit, right?
Yes, I'm always chomping at the bit. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. But yeah, I mean, I think university admissions policies have not been looked at enough in this space in terms of empowering students. I know, as a secondary teacher, and this whole idea around grading and evaluating students and what we value and what we give marks for and who gets marks for what and all of that is so inequitable, right? And so then we get to the university level, and the reason that people are playing these games, in secondary and below, is because we're trying to help kids get into this system, into the university system. And so I do think that there's a role definitely in terms of university admissions and the messages that are sent down the chain, down the pipeline, about who really is worthy of being a scholar, who's worthy to walk your walls of your institution. I don't have a perfect solution to that, but I do know that having more holistic admissions policies, and I know those are words that I'm not the first to say, but that there's something there about what we're doing to our kids. We're doing it because we're trying to get them into a college, right? And that can be very, I think, as we know, the system is rooted in whiteness, and so a lot of that oppression is happening because we're trying to enter a system that is grounded in whiteness to begin with. So I think, at the university level, there needs to be some real examination about how we uplift all children and send messages about who's worthy of a higher education.
Yeah. Kiara, you want to say something? Because I know you work right at the high school level. So you are that pipeline, right? That last stop right before our students enter UCLA. And I know you prepare many students to enter. So what are your thoughts?
Actually, a lot. I was reflecting on what Scorza had on his presentation. Dr. Sean Harper had said, when students come into higher ed, it's important that we make sure they get their degree, right? Something of that sort. So if students, I remember when I was at UCLA, I worked for ASP, it was a supports program. So I was a counselor. I was a peer counselor for other UCLA students. And when I tell you, my role, my job helps so many other students just feel safe, feel connected, pass classes, and get closer to that degree. I feel that we need more of that across the board. And it's really hard in K through 12. Like I'm telling you, there's so many moving parts all day, every day. We are putting out fires left and right. We're at the same time trying to prevent the fires as we're taking them out, right? So I wish we could bring that model more to the K through 12 schooling, where we have mentorship involved. And I think that's a key part of ensuring students graduate. Also, in a higher ed, and this just happened to my sister. My sister is receiving her second master's at a university in New York. I won't share because there's some issues going on right now. Like I won't share the actual school. But her advisor, my sister's Black, the advisor is a white. There was some talk around already her being a racist teacher, but none of the colleagues checked her about it, not even the dean. She made my sister retake a course even though she took it. And my sister's the only one out of the entire graduate program for this program that had to retake the class. She even asked my sister, third grade teacher as well. So yeah, we're a family of teachers now. But she had asked my sister, she had dropped the ball, didn't tell my sister that she had one more class she had to enroll in to get her degree in May of this year. So then she told my sister, okay, well, you have to take off work to make sure you come to that one class. My sister said, that's not fair. I don't have to do that. I shouldn't have to do that. And so fast forward, she said, okay, well, you'll just come back spring of 2022. What? My sister's like, but I'm still going to be working. I don't understand why we can't figure out a way to make sure that I graduate in May. So maybe I can watch recordings. Maybe where's the flexibility, right? That word came up. Where's the flexibility? Especially if I'm paying this school thousands of dollars to get a degree, where's the flexibility? Where's the humanizing of me? My sister had to relocate. And so fast forward, she was able to secure a meeting with the dean. The dean even called her out, right? And said some things, but this is my problem. My problem with this specific situation is everyone seems to know this particular advisor is an issue, but nobody's calling her out or holding her accountable. That is detrimental to the success of our Black students. That stops success. That stops students from graduating. My sister was at the verge of giving up. She was like, I got one master's. Okay, like this second one, I mean, if this is going to give me this much hell, why do I have to continue? I'm happy it worked out, but we have to keep in mind who we're appointing as advisors, because a lot of times they can be gatekeepers instead of gate openers. And that's a huge problem in higher ed. And as a K through 12 teacher, I have high school. The last thing I want to hear is one of my babies coming back and telling me that a teacher did X, Y, and Z, right? Or a professor rather, right? And I'm like, oh, but they came from a space where we were all understanding and flexible, and humanizing them as students, but then they go to higher ed and none of that happens, right? And I understand the level of rigor, and I understand, it's college. I'm in no way saying lower the rigor, but I do think there's this element of humanizing students that's often left out in higher ed.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a bunch of responses in the chat. Manla put a couple of really rich ones, although they're more about the admissions policy. And I think one of the things you're talking about is actually just, getting us through that retention and making sure that, students graduate, as you said, Dr. Harper talks about. But I do want to ask, okay, so Manla's question is, how is racism and anti-Blackness reflected in university admissions? And how can we push the boundaries of the holistic admissions to achieve a more just and equitable definition of merit and admissions process? And I think that's a great question. Manu, you want to expound on that, or is that enough? Because I'm really interested to hear what folks have to say about that around the admissions piece. Go ahead, bro.
Yeah, as Simone just suggested, we had a conversation just yesterday with the chancellor and many administrators, and we talked about some of the process that we went through to reform UCLA admissions for undergraduates and what needs to happen at the graduate level. Our board chairman, Bobby Grace, really raised the barriers at that level. But if you're looking across the pipeline, when you look at access, the definition of merit continues to rear its head, right? And in terms of, a very European-centered approach to defining merit, to evaluating students, to assessing and determining their value. So yeah, the question there is, do we need something even more dynamic and more transformative than just the holistic admissions idea, which simply adds on another element that we hope will be corrective in some way? Like if you add these other factors, life challenges, leadership, right? Does adding those criteria do enough to correct the damage that's done of overwhelmingly weighting admissions criteria on grades and test scores in curriculum that is overwhelmingly Eurocentric and rooted in white supremacy, in its foundations, just in terms of how the curriculum itself is structured and developed?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because some, and I see you, Dr. Orange, Tanika, some would say that, as I said earlier, that whole idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion actually really is not in its current sort of construct really equipped to do that transformative work that really addresses sort of the Eurocentric foundations and white supremacist foundations of merit, right? Of what it means to be worthy of even attending a selective university like UCLA. And so, Dr. Orange, tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, just really, just very quickly. The admissions is just a very interesting process to me. Just the same oppression that we feel about young people, coming into the university system on merit, it's the same thing of graduate students actually coming in. So there's no, GRE, but the notion of that, that weight that's still, even when we tell students, do not worry about the GRE, don't worry about it, the amount of pressure folks still feel when they come to our information sessions to apply, I just feel all the oppression is still on there. They're still afraid to do it. Black students in particularly feel that they don't write as well to get into the university, so they just won't do it. I meet with every single Black student and student of color who wants to apply to our program. And just to explain to them, the goal is for you to succeed regardless of the fact, like they just needed to hear somebody say, I care. It's more than just grades. It is about truly anti-Blackness and anti-racism. And what does that mean? Because usually we don't speak about it. We throw it all in again, like Anthony said, and Mandela said, just that equity diversity thing. But just to have someone say, you're here because we care about your diversity of thought. We're here because we do center anti-Blackness in this program. We're here because this isn't about sinking or swimming. Everybody should swim, and our commitment is to make sure you get through it. Just for us to say that, all of a sudden our applicant pool for African-American students just started to pour in. And that we always get this, thank goodness, I feel like somebody cared, because you've already been so in a system that just doesn't feel like that they don't care. And then to apply to a university where when you walk on campus, it's hard pressed sometimes to find someone who looks like you. Like, why would I want to be in that situation? Why would I want to be there, right? So again, just thinking about the practices, you have to have people in there who really truly understand what anti-Blackness and anti-racism is, then how to shift policies and push the mirror. And so we have to start with some things like that. So.
Others want to chime in?
I really want to push that point a little bit, Anthony, and really challenge Alex and Simone as well as Kamari to chime in. Alex and Simone are just on the other side of the admissions question. They'll be working to help other students get in. Kamari is on the front end, engaged in her application process. What about your experience as Black students? Do you think should have been considered for Alex and Simone that maybe was not taken into account when you were being evaluated? And for Kamari, what about your incredible experience? Do you only wish there was a space to kind of include that in your application or see that was going to be acknowledged as you were applying for college?
I don't know what parts of my application, what things I would like to add to my application, but I will say that I believe in access programs, like VIPS. I used to be a VIPS counselor for Hamilton as well, and being able to being fresh out of the college admissions process and coaching students through the admissions process. I think my first year, 4 out of 6 of my seniors got accepted to UCLA. So having people who have that knowledge, guiding people directly, is something that's crucial in that time. Because it's when you're filling out college applications, when you're in high school, they don't really tell you what's on the college application until you're filling out the college application, really. You don't get time to really write your essays ahead of time or find out you can find out what the essays are, but when you're a junior in high school, nobody's really placing emphasis on thinking about what your answer should be to those questions. So when there's people that are in the schools that are specifically there for that purpose to help you fill out your college application, that look like you, that have done it, that have been in the same situation as you, I think that's a super important piece.
Yeah, and I think kind of building off of kind of Simone's second point of these resources that can be provided to students. I'm currently a VIPS counselor for LACES, and kind of being on the other side of that admissions process and kind of seeing wow, there's so many inconsistencies or gaps where you could see okay, this student needs support here. So I think that's kind of the first kind of way you could support that. And I think the second is just by the admissions process, kind of understanding this idea of intersectionality, that for example, for myself, I think for my application, the part that was probably missing the most is I talked a little bit about being Nigerian American, and with that comes being first gen, being a first gen immigrant, X, Y, and all those types of things, and X, Y, and Z. So I think kind of the admission process needs to be conscious of that one stake of a Black student's identity could lead to so many others and can have such a big effect on like their educational trajectory. But yeah.
For me, I just started applying for colleges, and I did apply to UCLA. And I feel like just during like filling out those applications, especially during COVID, I feel like it was kind of, I want to say it was a little bit even more hard, because when we were in school, I seen seniors like having senioritis and whatnot, and stressing, but they had like instant access to going to the college center and getting help. But during COVID, like virtually, it's kind of hard to really, reach out to the counselors and receive that help and whatnot. But I feel like on the application, I feel like more questions should, the questions should be more like it should be asking questions about the student as a whole, and not just about like academic wise and like test scores and stuff like that. I feel like that doesn't really read the student, even though the personal essay, like you can include so much, but my life is not just summed up in, I forgot the maximum word count, but I feel like, or maybe that, I feel like for the personal essay, maybe it shouldn't be a word count, because I can't really sum up my life in such, just, yeah, 350 words. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the questions, but yeah, that's how I feel.
Simone, you have your hand raised?
I want to add on to what Dr. Orange was saying about like how students need to hear that there's somebody that cares. Anywhere I go, every time he's there, I have to shout him out. Mr. Kenneth Turner was my BSU advisor in high school, and he's the reason that I'm at UCLA. Like he used to pull students into his office and say like, what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to get to college? Every time that we got accepted to a school, no matter how big or how small, if we printed out our acceptance letter, he would put it up on the wall in his office. So just kind of having that piece of people who care, and kind of to guide you through that process as well. Like even to this day, every time I accomplish something, my first text is to Mr. Turner. That's something that's super crucial as well.
Wonderful. Don't forget, Mala, that I'm just on the other side of that admissions process too, with my old self, right? And just having gone through the graduate piece, and it was interesting. I just think, I got some years on me, so I knew exactly what I needed to do to navigate it, and I wanted specifically to attend at UCLA, but I gotta say, nonetheless, very few students who looked like me in that, right? There were just 3 of us out of a group of 30. Our Latinx brothers and sisters are far better represented, and so even that leads me to believe that there's greater work that we can do in the graduate admission space as well as the undergrad. And so, although I thought the application process was fairly holistic at the graduate level, I mean, I was basically able to tell my story and allow that to be evaluated as to whether I should be admitted. So I wanna basically, because somebody made a point, and I think it was Marcia, this whole idea, because we're talking about only one side, one pandemic, right? White supremacy and everything else. And we have this issue of COVID right now, right? And it's having a major impact on how it is that Simone and Alex and Kamari and even I, how we're getting our education right now, all right? I mean, and so I wanna at least have an opportunity to speak to that and how it is either basically exacerbating conditions, and we know it is for many of our students when you look at the data, but also how is it presenting opportunities and possibilities for thinking differently about how we might move forward. We just had this conference today, and I gotta say this, we agreed that we want to forge, new post-pandemic possibilities. We don't want to go back to a normal that was underserving Black children in the first place. That's just ridiculous to even consider that. So thinking about how the pandemic is impacting what you guys are doing at the university level, and then we have some teachers, how it's impacting how it is that you're doing your work and serving kids as well. Anybody want to take that on?
Anthony, actually, we would love to get from an educational leader's perspective, Chancellor Block would actually like to make
absolutely
a comment. So I will.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, Chancellor Block. We appreciate you being here.
Sure, thank you. Well, I'm here mainly to listen, and I appreciate you giving me a chance to say something. It is interesting, one thing that I've certainly learned during the pandemic and the very switch to remote education is the educational disparities become so much clearer in a situation like we're facing now. And I ran into it just in, my own experience was teaching a small seminar in the spring and just seeing the different capabilities of students. Some students were sitting in their own rooms in their homes, obviously very comfortable. One student was in their car, taking a break because he was working. And other students clearly were sharing bedrooms and finding it very difficult to find a quiet space with younger siblings. And it became so clear the different circumstances that all of our students come from. Some of that disappears on campus in the classroom, but it reminds us all about the really different challenges that our students face, the different backgrounds, the different socioeconomic positions they're in, and how that impacts their opportunities for learning. So I think the pandemic has focused attention on where the limitations are, I think, of remote education, where the disparities are. Certainly the digital divide, which I thought was disappearing quickly because the cost of computing equipment was going down so rapidly, bandwidth issues become a problem. And we've handed out, I think, 1,000 MiFis and laptops to try to provide opportunities for students. But nonetheless, it's become very clear that, as we think about remote education as part of our portfolio of teaching methodologies, we're gonna have to be very mindful of the differences that students, how it impacts students differentially. So it's been an eye-opener. I mean, it's a terrible pandemic, and of course, all the other national disturbances have just led to obviously a terrible week for all of us. But clearly, the continuing pandemic has raised issues about educational disparities that were obviously there before, but really more obvious, obviously, in the current situation.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to hear you talk about at the higher ed level, because obviously those of us who work for LAUSD, we've been really trying to do our very best to address some of those disparities in terms of, device distribution and, like you say, MiFi or hotspot distribution to families just to ensure access. But we use this statement that you got to Maslow before you bloom. Talking about Bloom's taxonomy is a sort of a learning taxonomy that we use, but basically ensuring that folks are fed. So we feel pretty good about serving 93 million meals to families in food insecure communities. And so yeah, we feel good about that, and it's good to hear that the university is also embracing that effort to ensure that we're at least doing what we can to address that differential, right, that exists. Anybody else? I know that Kiara, you made a fairly big splash in terms of an LA Times article talking about exactly what Chancellor Block is mentioning in terms of how it is that students are accessing remote learning. You want to talk about that?
Yes, sure. I think one of the biggest things my school side recognized was students weren't going to tell you that they didn't have technology, right? They were not going to say anything. They weren't going to let you know. They were just going to fall off the grid. And so what we did is we had multiple, and I'm sure this was throughout the district, multiple days where we distributed hotspots and laptops. Now, I think that our goal was to get everyone, right? We can only do so much as a school during a pandemic. We did calls or made calls. We did the auto messaging. We did emails. We did everything. We had everyone hands-on, principal, assistant principal. And even then, we still missed students. And I remember calling home right before we went on break because the district, there are no Fs. I know you all know what's going on with that. So we were calling home just to try to get in contact with students. And a student shared with me that they didn't have hotspot the entire semester. Mm-hmm. And my heart was broke. I couldn't believe that the student went the entire semester. Now, did the school do everything? We did everything we possibly could. I mean, my principal was even dropping off technology to homes when he found out that they didn't have one, right? They couldn't come to the school. And so I started to transition my thoughts a little bit, and I want to apply a little pressure to parents, right? That child's parent didn't even know. That child's parent was not involved, right? And so I'm constantly thinking about schools and what we're doing to make sure our students are succeeding, and making sure, like, I'm challenging every chance I get my admin, other teachers. Our conversations are always talking about, we're always talking about how to support students, how to be flexible, how to make our curriculum more colorful, how to make it relatable, how to meet the needs of the students, meet them where they're at. We're constantly having these conversations, but I started to transition my thinking to, where are the parents and where are they having their conversations to grow? Because if schools and teachers are doing that work, and I know this is not necessarily related to higher ed, but these babies eventually will go to higher ed, but where are those parents involved, and how are they finding out, and how are they making sure that their child is on top of things, right? Because again, we're in a pandemic, so we have limits on what we can do as schools and as teachers, right? I can't go into my student's face and say, hey, I'm missing this. Where is it? What's up? I can't make that eye contact. I can't make them feel my presence, right? Like, we're not in person. So one of the things I constantly think about is, how are we engaging more parents? Because if we don't have parents on our side, we are struggling. We are struggling. Again, we're doing all that we can as LAUSD teachers. And I hope that was communicated in the articles, both LA Times articles, right? I tried to make it very clear, like, we're doing what we can. We're doing everything. I'm losing sleep. I am calling. I remember one student I had called, and, we have a platform called Mices. And so when you log in, there are about, I want to say, like 20 calls. So it wasn't that this student in particular fell off the grid. It's just this student, the parent was not engaged or answering, right? So we were calling, we were emailing, and we all had to document. So it was about 20 calls across the school. So that means the counselor tried, the principal tried, all the teachers tried, right? So we're doing our part, but I'm just wondering about parents.
Yeah, can I chime in there too, Anthony?
Sure, and then we're going to take some questions from our audience. Go ahead, Boosie.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I've found myself often talking about this parent piece. Also, not, we're not doing a good enough job of letting our parents know what's going on, right? So it's not just even the technical thing. That's huge right now, obviously, right? But also the way that we're trying to transform curriculum, the way that we're talking about new ways of thinking and new methodologies. When the parents of our kids went to school, they were doing things the old way. But now, we're trying to do different things in the classroom. Parents are nervous about that. I remember parents coming to my room asking why I wanted their kid to struggle in math. And I had to explain what productive struggle was, that's part of the growth. Why aren't you teaching my kid the algorithm? Well, because we are building up to that. We're not doing a good enough job educating parents, just breaking down the walls of the school building in general, so that everybody, parents, images on TV, everywhere you go needs to start to look like what we want school to look like, not what it used to look like, which is what all the images and imagery and thinking is still sort of stuck in right now. And one last point I just want to make before we go to that question is that I keep quoting Kamari when she came to our heat PD before, and I asked her at the time, I said, what can teachers do to get more students to log in? And Kamari, you said, make it fun, right? Make it engaging and make it connected. And so there are a lot of technical issues that we know that are preventing students access, but there's also a lot of connection, personal, emotional connection issues that are keeping kids away from the Zoom call, keeping kids away from engaging with the assignments that are assigned, all of that stuff. And we saw in the HEAT community that when we started to infuse engagement strategies across the schools, that our attendance numbers did start to get better. And of course we acknowledge all of the systemic things that go into that. But thank you, Kamari, for that statement, make it fun, because that's how we're going to get learning to happen, is when people feel that learning is connected to who they are and who they want to be.
Absolutely. And thanks for always reminding us to try to render our schools in an art of possibility, right? And rethinking curriculum and rethinking a bunch of things. I want to open up comments from the audience or questions. I think that there's an opportunity here for some really, really, really great folks providing rich discussion. Questions?
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Kevin Harbour. I work for an organization, LA County Business Federation. We do public policy advocacy. And one of the things that we did last year was a forum on the digital divide. You know, there's a big issue on the business side, right? With COVID-19 and the pivot from retail and being able to go to restaurants to online. On the educational side, it's especially important. A lot of students, as you all know, don't have broadband access, depending on the geography that they live in, the speed and feed, if there is broadband infrastructure in their home or in their neighborhood, and then whether it's affordable. So we're working with the California Public Utilities Commission. We're forming what we call the Los Angeles Orange County Regional Broadband Consortia, which is a collection of consortiums all over LA County to try to fix this problem. We're working with the ISPs. We're identifying dollars so that we can get built out. And then we're working to find out, you know, like in San Marin County, Northern California, they have 10 gigabits, right? In Orange County and LA, it's less than 15% that has that kind of bandwidth. And the problem is that when you have working parents, my son's an educator, middle school, he teaches virtual. And so if you have working parents that are on Zoom, and then the kids that are on Zoom, I'm on Zoom all day, every day. If my wife works from home, one of us is going to get dropped during the call. Okay, and that's disruptive for an educator. So I'm just curious if, you know, you folks are experiencing that kind of thing. I want you to know that we're out there. We love to get, we're getting letters of support, like, for example, Dr. Francisco Rodriguez of LACCD and, you know, Deborah Eduardo at LA County Office of Education. But, you know, we need support in the form of, you know, just endorsing what we're trying to accomplish. And, but I'd like to hear your experiences from the educators, if you've had any challenges in that area.
Yeah, we're experiencing it. And those hotspots really don't work if you have multiple children in the family. That's one of the issues that you just talked about. So it just then just reinforces the inequities, right? Having, you know, a hotspot which is truly limited in the bandwidth that it provides a family, and then a mom's telling me, Mr. Jackson, I have three kids who all need to be online at the same time, you know, 3 school-age children. So yeah, we are experiencing that, and you know, I think our superintendent, you know, similar to Chancellor Block, is doing that work around ensuring that we're addressing those issues as best we can, and getting, you know, multiple hotspots in the hands of families for whom that is a problem. I mean, we've been fairly successful in some ways, but as Kiara Williams said, not totally, because we still have.
Well, we you know, this broadband consortium, we're a conduit, we're a resource for you.
Okay.
So Anthony, we're connected on Facebook. Why don't you send me, give me a private message with your contact info. And I'd like you to get involved in this discussion, because we have regional thought leaders and stakeholders where we're going to put pressure on the CPUC to try to fix this, because LA right now, for the last 2 or 3 years, we're suffering, and it's, the right attention is not being given.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Sharon, your hand was up, and then Benny.
Hi. I'm Sharon Parker Fraser. I'm from New York, UCLA Alumni. I'm a New York chapter member, and my son is a graduate from UCLA as well, 2012. I'm here in New York, and I am an arts educator. I work in the public high schools here in New York. We are dealing with homeless. We have families living in shelters who do not have access literally to, we're talking food, clothing, health. So we're dealing with a homeless situation here, and the numbers are going up. So as a teacher in the arts, and I've been studying, different ways of connecting to my students in the arts. That was my major at UCLA. I was a dance education theater minor. So bringing the arts into a Zoom environment is extremely challenging, especially when my students, some of them are living in shelters, and it's a huge challenge. And we have a lot of students with special needs. I mean, my high school has like 25% of the students have IEPs. So again, I'm facing challenges, as an educator. And again, we're dealing with food situations. And again, the homeless situation is really concerning because a lot of our families are living in shelters. But thank you for this forum, and thank you for letting me speak. Much appreciation. And, I'm still holding it down in New York. And we have a huge chapter here of UCLA alumni like myself. I'm a native New Yorker, but, I'm still a Bruin for life. And as an educator, thank you.
All right.
Can I jump in, Anthony, real quick?
Actually, Benny has his hand up. He's been waiting. Hold on, Boosie.
Yep.
Go ahead, Benny.
Okay. My name is Benny Blaze. I work with the Santa Monica College, and one of the things that we did to address the Wi-Fi issue, we opened up 2 of our campuses so students can come on campus. And so, and the Wi-Fi is going on, so they have access to Wi-Fi. And because we was having some of the same problem, before I left, we have a problem with homeless students. One of the facilities we used a lot was the UCLA Shelter, which is started by UCLA students. Half the students in that shelter are community college students, and they opened up in Santa Monica. So we have a lot of our students who work there. Another thing that we did too that I thought was really critical, we addressed a lot of the students because of the pandemic and all these other issues. It was having a lot of issues with mental issues. So we made a priority, make sure the resources involved in mental health, and also we told all the counselors to be prepared to address those issues at a base level and be prepared to make referrals. Another thing we did, we found out a lot of students, when we did a survey right at the beginning of the pandemic, one of the higher needs were, as you mentioned, technology and food. So we gave out so many Chromebooks. We ordered so many Chromebooks, and we gave out a lot to the point where we even loaned some to some of my fellow community colleges that didn't have enough. And in terms of food, we connected with, I think it's Everyday Table or Every Table something. And students who live as far as Watts, as far as East LA, as far as the Valley, they were referred by different programs on campus. They get 7 meals a week, once a week, and they sign up on Wednesdays. And then every Wednesday, we do a food giveaway for any student just who shows up from 12 to 3. That's one of the things I do weekly so I can get a chance to go on campus. Okay, at first they wouldn't let me do it because I was too old. But they kind of changed the rules. But those are some of the needs that we need to address. And also a lot of things I know we had a missions workshop with a lot of students. And one of the things students need to be aware of, and parents, of the resources the universities do have. Like somebody put CCP in the chat line. Well, most people don't know what that is. And some of the resources community colleges have that students can benefit, especially remotely. And when I talk to the high school students now who are talking about coming to UCLA or any other major university, first thing I tell them, in your city or wherever you are, try to make sure you do class at community college, and that would really help you in terms of the admission process. So those are just some of the things I would just wanted to bring to your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bootsy, I just got to ask you to hold on. I want to give Professor A chance to submit his question to Chancellor Block.
I want to say thank you for all that came on the panel and the students that spoke. I have messaged some of you. I want to work with you. But my question to the Chancellor Block, and he just gave me his email address, but how do we go? I have an idea that uses a esports platform that is virus and recession proof to create a new academic gaming league to create jobs, scholarships, and encouragement for our students. How do I go about presenting that vision to you?
Thank you. As I mentioned, probably the best thing, Professor, is to send me an email with just a brief description so I can get it in the hands of the right people. There's obviously a lot of interest in e-gaming and all the areas surrounding that. And this sounds like this is a really novel use. And I'm not an expert in this, but I'll make sure it gets to the right people.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And just to be clear, mine is about the majors, English, business, and the A through G requirements. So it's not based on video games. It's based on the content that we're trying to get across through the digital divide and through the pandemic situation and barriers. So thank you once again.
Sounds interesting. Share it with us. I appreciate it.
You're going to love it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, Bootsy.
Yeah, so I always want to make sure that we focus on, that we take an assets-based lens as well. So we don't want to ignore a lot of these issues that have gotten in the way, right? And this conversation about the digital divide is really important. But I think another thing that we need to focus our energy on is uplifting all the creativity, the innovation, the resiliency. I mean, our kids are figuring out how to do things that, we never had to figure out. And so many of them are doing an amazing job just, trying to just navigating what it's going to take to get into that Zoom, to do that work, to engage with their teachers and their other students, or if they can't get into the Zoom, how they're going to come around the back end and send a message to their teacher or whatever it is, right? We need to really spend a lot of time sort of uplifting that student, just empower the kids who are making this happen, because we can clearly see the things that are that are getting in the way, but we just, that's all I wanted to point out. We just need to acknowledge the kids that are making it happen.
Hey, thanks, Bootsy. You always remind me of that important stuff, right? And working from an assets-based and strengths-based perspective. So we've run out of time, you guys. This has been a really rich conversation. I really appreciate. I really appreciate our panelists. I want to truly acknowledge Simone and Alex and Kamari. You guys, the future is bright. I got to tell you, future is bright. You guys are empowered, and I look forward to watch you guys do your thing. Certainly, Dr. Orange, Bootsy, we've been doing this work and continue to do it. And so I want to thank you as well. Manla, as always, brother. I got to say this, because Manla and I, we came up together, and I can remember, there's something about UCLA, and I need to wrap this up this way, because, it was always put to me, how come you didn't go to an HBCU? And I said, well, actually, I kind of did, right? Because if you were at UCLA at the time, we were there, right? Between the NOMO office and at the time it was a BSA office, right? Basically had what essentially was an HBCU right within that campus. And I think it's super important to acknowledge that as an aspect of the supports that we received, which I think were super super valuable, right? In addition to the programming piece and the structural piece that the university had going on. So I want to thank everybody for attending. Did I leave anybody else off? Chancellor Block, thank you for your comments. Thank you so much and for all that you're doing. And Bobby, thank you. I'm trying to see who else is on here. And of course, Michelle, thanks for giving me an opportunity to facilitate this conversation. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. I'm turning it back over to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Anthony. This has been wonderful. Again, I'll echo thank you to our panelists for your thought leadership and honest input. We want to thank, of course, Chancellor Block for his participation. We would also like to thank all of you for coming, for joining us today. You could be doing anything on a Saturday and you decided to be here with us talking about these very important issues of social justice. So we thank you from the bottom of our heart for that. We encourage you to consider UBA as a member, as a donor, as a supporter in whatever ways that you can. And we are obviously, I think we're 4 down. We've got 2 more to go. We have a 4 o'clock panel starting in just about an hour on the anatomy of a racist with Dr. Wimbush and Malefi Asante and Professor Willie McBride, moderated by fellow alum, Dr. Gina Fontaine. So please grab something to eat and come back and join us. We appreciate you guys so much, as I said. Thank you so much, and we'll see you at the next one. Thank you.